So now we're on the top of Chav Tes Amud Beis, and the Gemara says, "Vahani b'nei knosan in huvamai ikri kan v'lo sia isha ruya lo." There are two dimensions to the parsha of Ones, and very similarly in the case of Mafat. On the one hand, the Ones generates a chi of knas, but on the other hand, he's got to marry her. And that's the Torah's prescribes v'lo sia isha. Now, in the cases that we deal with in our Mishnah, whether it's mamzeres and chayve lavim, whether it's achos and chayve krisus, you cannot apply the mitzvah of v'lo sia isha. So the Gemara thinks now it's a package deal. Both dimensions are interdependent. If he has to marry her and he can marry her, then he pays a knas if he decides not to marry. If, on the other hand, he cannot marry her, then there's no v'lo sia isha, there shouldn't be any knas as well. And the Gemara now is going to bring drashos to prove that even that we split the parsha into two. It's not haba hatali. It's not a package deal. You can have A without B. You can have a knas without v'lo sia isha, like in the case of chayve lav and chayve krisus. Omrei Shlokish, how do we prove that? So now we're going to have two parshios in which a certain word, it's always going to be that key word, repeats itself thrice. So we have the parsha of Ones, and there the word Nara repeats itself thrice. And we have the parsha of Mafata, where the word Besula repeats itself thrice. So Reish Lakish is interested in Parshas Ones, where we find Nara 3 times. Ki yimtza ish Nara Besula, so that's number 1. Then it says, "V'nasan hashochev, ha'ish hashochev, etc., lavi hanara." Now, notice 2 things. Number 1, the Torah did not have to say hanara at all. I mean, it mentions already Nara at the beginning of the parsha, so why would it have to repeat Nara? Notice number 2, that in the pasuk that says v'nasan, etc., hanara chamishim lavia hanara chamishim kesev, the word nara has a prefix of a hey. So this is what Reish Lakish is going to darshan on these 3. Again, it's not 3; it's really 2. But you add the hey, and it makes it into a third. So nara means the first pasuk. And then Nara is the second pasuk. And then it says Hanara, which gives you a third Nara. So why do we need 3? Chad legufe, we're talking about a case where she's a Nara. Chad lasuye chayve lav, even though she's a mamzeres. The chad lasuye chayve krisus, in the case of achos ishto, achoso, achos aviv, and eshes achiv, etc., etc. Okay, so this is Reish Lakish's approach, that we should derive the conclusion about chayve krisus from the hey of Hanara, because that hey of Hanara produces a third Nara in the pasuk. So chad legufe, and chad lechayve lavim, and then chad lechayve krisus. Okay, I have a question to ask. I'll just throw it out there. I think the Gemara is going to have to deal with this question. When you're marbe a psula, like chayve lavim and chayve krisus, then you build up a pyramid. Bahadragas, we say. In other words, you go from the lightest to the heaviest. If we would have, excuse me, had a fourth naro, we would have included chayve mises, because that's on top of the, like a ball emo or something. That's on, well, emo is not a good example because how could she be not a psula, but let's say bito. But we don't have a fourth nara, so we cap it off. The first nara is legufe, then we go up one notch to chayvi lab until finally we get to chayvi krisis. But my question is, what about chayvi ese? Let's say, for example, a Kohen Gadol. No, she's not a psula. Oh, let's say a Mitri Sheni. So what would be in Chayve Ese? So it would seem to me if you're starting with Chad Lagufe, the next level should be Chayve Ese, and then you have to cap it off for Chayve Malchus. You don't have creases in the picture. All right. Rav Papa has a triple psula in the Parsha Mafata. We'll see later on there's a Gzeir Shava between the Parsha Mafata and the Parsha Vanusa. Besula, besulos, ha besulos. So again, I'll just read the pasuk out loud. B'chiyafata ish besula. Again, this is in Parshas Mishpatim. So you have the first besula. Ashelo rasa v'chachavi mosh mahar yimarena lo lisha. Ve'im ma'en yima'en avia l'tisa lo kesef yishkol kimor besulos. So again, it doesn't really say the word besula twice in the pasuk, but it says besulos, which is the same word as besula except in plural. That produces the second besulos, and then you have habsulos, the hay, which duplicates the besulos. So you have three: chad legufe, chad l'chayve lam, l'chayve l'chayve krisis. So now the Gemara, excuse me, is going to analyze why Rav Papa couldn't accept the threefold drasha of Reish Lakish and vice versa. It makes sense that the Gemara would start with Rav Papa because we're learning about ones, so it makes sense to find a triple ribui in the case of ones, which is exactly what Reish Lakish did. So Rav Papa my time alama Reish Lakish, and he answers who that extra hanara. I need it for another derivation. And that's Abaye. What happens, interesting, after the Maisa Ones to the Nara, and before the Hamada Bidin, because the father didn't get a chance yet to subpoena this fellow into Bezdin, in the meantime, she died. So Abaye says, Ba Leo Mesa, and then she died before the father got to be Mamid her bidin. Potter, she never v'nosan lavi hanara v'lo avi mesa. So the word hanara has come to tell you that she's got to be alive, and then the chiv knas accrues to the father. Reish Lakish my time alone Papa. We have three psulos in the Parsha Mafata. According to Reish Lakish, I need the word ha besulos for Gzeir Shava to equate the dinim of ones and mafata. Now here's very interesting. This Gzeir Shava means that A sheds a light on B and B back on A. It's reciprocal. It's like, reflected light that bounces back. there's something missing in the parsha of Ones, which appears in the parsha of Mafata. There's something that appears in the parsha of Mafata, and it's missing in the parsha of Ones. So we're going to combine these two parshas. It works like this. In the parsha of Ones, it says Chamishim Kesef. And that's critical. Why? Because in biblical currencies, we have shkolim and we have mos. But I think we spoke about moti shemran, that you pay mea mo. And here in the parsha of Onos, it says chamishim, but it doesn't indicate whether we're talking about shkolim or mos. However, in the parsha Mafata, it says Kimor Absulos. And it says Kesef Yishkol. Those are the key words. So the Kesef Yishkol doesn't tell you how much money it is, but it tells you it's Shkolim. Yishkol is Miloshin Shkolim, the verb Shkolim. So what's missing in Ones, namely that we're talking about Shkolim, we're going to derive from Mefata, because there it says Kesef Yishkol. What's missing in Mefata, you don't know how much he has to pay, that will supply by Ones, where the Torah says Chamishim Kesef. And all this is based on Xeret Shava that allows us to compare Ones and Mefata. Kedesanya, we learned by Mefata, it says Kesef Yishkol Kemor Absulos. Shehei Lo, Shehei Zeh Kemor Absulos. So when it says Shehei Zeh, it means the shear of Knas by Mefuta is going to be Chamishim. We don't know that from the Parsha of Mefuta. We can only derive that from the Xeret Shava and the Parsha of Onos. Kimor Abasulos. Mor Abasulos Kozeh. That the Chamishim Kesef of Ones, which is Shkolim now, and we derive Shkolim from Kesef Yishkol in the Parsha of Mefata, and therefore Mefata will pay Chamishim. So Kesef Yishkol doesn't tell you Chamishim, and Ones doesn't tell you that it's Yishkol, it only says Chamishim Kesef. So we derive Shkolim from Mefata and Chamishim from Ones. Reish Lakish Nami Abaye. Now a puppet's logic, by introducing Abaye, it becomes a kasha on Reish Lakish. And now the Gemara says, Rapapi Nami, Miboile Xeret Shalom. So at this point in the Gemara is so stumped by this question, namely, how is Rav Papa going to derive the Xeret Shalom, and how is Reish Lakish going to derive V'lo Lavia Mesa like Abaye? Now the Gemara does a really sharp move, and it combines Reish Lakish with Rav Papa into one happy enterprise, and there are 6 psukim, because we get 3 from Ones and 3 from Mefata. Ela Shisa Kroy Ksive Nara Nara Hanara Psula Psula Psulas Trey Legufayu Chad Lekirabai Chad Xer Shava Isule Trey Chad Lasuye Chayve Lave Chad Lasuye Chayve Krisis. Beautiful. So we have 6, and that's the exact number that we need. We're going to have 2 out of the 6 are going to tell me Legufayu, The other two will tell me Abai and Zeret Shava, and the last two will tell me Chayve Lav and Chayve Krisus. Gemara says that not every Tana agrees with our Mishnah. Lafuke midahai Tana. Our Mishnah says you pay Knas for Chayve Krisus is against the following Tana. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, Velo sia leisha Shimon Atemoni Omer Isha sheyesh lo ba havaya. And it means the following: according to Shimon Atimni, there's a chiyuv knas in the case of ones if it's an isha sheyesh ba havaya. So, in other words, Shimon Atimni is integrating the two parts of this two elements of this parsha of ones, namely the chiyuv knas together with the chiyuv to marry. And velo sil isha, it means isha sheyesh ba havaya, that if he went and he married her, the marriage would be valid. Rav Shimon ben Asya Omer, he disagrees, and you're only chayav beisha ruya lekaima. Right, we're going to have to figure out my beinai. It sounds almost identical, but just to translate the words of Rav Shimon ben Asya, he's talking about an isha ruya lekaima. Any woman who's asura olav, and he has to divorce her if he married her, is excluded from knas. My beinayim or abzera mamzeres unesinai kebenayim. Leman diomar yesh ba'avaya ha nami yesh ba'avaya. Uleman diomar ru'ya lekaima ha ena ru'ya lekaima. So let's go easy. The easy case is Rav Shimon ben Asya. Rav Shimon ben Asya wants to know: are you allowed to marry this woman? If you're not allowed to marry this woman, then there's no knas. So therefore, we have to exclude mamzeres and nesina, and they will not get knas. Why? Because those are chayve lavim, and it's eno ru'uya lekaim. Of Shimon, and the Shimon Atimni will say that no, there's a chiyuv knas. Why? Because yesh b'havaya, there would be tfisas kedushin if he were to marry, which means that according to Shimon Atimni, we really split the parsha into two, right? Because yesh b'havaya means there would be tfisas kedushin, but certainly there's no velocia leisha. No, we're not going to impose a chiyuv, and again, unless you say esay dochalos, but leave that out for the moment. There will not be a chiyuv to marry her, and yet he pays the knas. Whereas according to Rab Shimon ben Menasya, you need ru'uya lekaima. It's not a question of tfisas kedusha. Question as to whether or not he could be married to her. So let's take the case of mamzeres. The mamzeres is eno ru'uya lekaima, and therefore there's no knas. So you'll never have a situation of ru'uya lekaima where there's a p'tur knas. Or if you want to say it the other way around, whenever there's a knas, then it's ru'uya lekaima. So let's just understand what the nafkamina here is between Shimon Atimni and Reb Shimon ben Asya. According to Shimon Atimni, we're looking for the abstract Yeshla Havaya. When I say abstract, he's not allowed to marry her, but if he went ahead and he married her, would we recognize and validate that kedushin? And the answer is yes in the case of Chayve Lav. And that's called Yeshba Havaya. So there would be knas in the case of a mamzer. Based on yesh ba havaya. But in the case of krisus, it's ein ba havaya. So our Mishnah could not reflect the Shita Shimon Atimni. And with a Kolshkein, it could not reflect the Shita of Rav Shimon ben Menashe, because Rav Shimon ben Menashe would say that even in the case of Chayvei Lavin, there's no Knas. Why? No. I'm sorry. So wait a minute. So what's Rav Shimon ben Menashe? Rav Shimon ben Menashe says Re'uya L'kaima, to the exclusion of even a Mamzeres. So a Mamzeres does not get Knas, according to Rav Shimon ben Menashe. So let me just think out loud again. Is it correct? Is it logical to say that according to Reb Shimon ben Menashe, the two parts of the parsha are interdependent? I think so. I mean, again, if you want to argue with me, please do. Maybe I'm making a mistake. I don't know. But that's what it seems to me. There's no difference between yesh ba'avaya or ru'ya l'kaima in the case of chayvi lavma according to Rabbi Akiva, because saying kedushin totsu. So you can't say that's going to be the nafkamina. And according to Shimon Atimni, it's yesh ba'avaya and chayvi lavim, and that was going to be the nafkamina between Shimon Atimni and Reb Shimon As, because if we're going like Rabbi Akiva, there's no tfisis kedushin and chayvi lavim. And therefore, even in the case of Mamzeres, there would be no knas, because it's not what you call it, yesh ba'havai. So Gemara says, so now we're getting into the case of what's called chayvei esek that I mentioned earlier. Because the Torah enjoins the Kohen Gadol to marry a basula. If she's an almana, she's already been married, this will be a second marriage to the Kohen Gadol, he's not allowed to marry. So wait a second. So now we have to ask the following question. In a case of almana l'kohen gadol, again, she still has to be a basula. I guess it's almana. Oh, maybe it's nichnas olachup of lo nivola. We have Adim that she didn't have beer. Okay, fine. So now we have almana l'kohen gadol, and we're talking about an esek. Ukirab simoy. Tanya Rav Simoy Omer Minakol Oser Rabbi Akiva Mamzerim Chut Me'almana L'Kohen Gadol. Sharei Omer Torah. I'm going to read the pasuk. It says Almana Ubrucha V'Chalola Zona Es Elu Lo Yikach. I apologize. Again, let's see. Tisanya Rabbi Simoy Omer Minakol Oser Rabbi Akiva Mamzerim Chut Me'almana L'Kohen Gadol. Sharei Omer Torah. Almana Gush V'Chalol V'Zona Es Elu Lo Yikach Kiyim B'Sula Me'amav Yikach Isha V'Lo Yechalel. And now the Gemara is being medayik according to Rav Simoy's interpretation of Rabbi Akiva, that it says Lo Yechalel Chilulim Hu Oseh. If he marries an almana, then he makes the child from that marriage into a cholol. But the vlad is not a mamzer. Otherwise, why would the Torah emphasize lo yechalel? Salmona l'kohen gadol is ena ru'il l'kaima, but there would be havaya, because if there's no mamzerus, then we assume that there's havaya. Oh, so according to that, so let's see. So if we're going with, beautiful. If we're going with Shimon Hatimni, and all you need is an Icha Sheyesh Ba'avaya, then in the case of Almana L'Kohen Gadol, there is Havaya. Right? Because that's what we learn from the Dik Lo Yechalel, Kilul Saval, Mamzer Mena Osa, and therefore the Tfisas Kedushin, and Rabbi Akiva, who says there's no Tfisas Kedushin, V'chayve Lavin, would agree that there is Kedushin, that there is Tfisas Kedushin, and she's Yesh Ba'Havaya in the case of Chayve Ese. And therefore, she would get Knas if she's a Psula. Why? Because it's Yesh Ba'Havaya. That since there's no Mamzerus, it means that there is Tfisas Kedushin. But Ula Rabbi Shovev, right, he has a different interpretation. Rabbi Akiva the Omer Bovin Etzavech Al Akiva ben Yosef Shoya Omer Shekol Sheilo Bia Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. So according to Rav Yeshevov's understanding of Rabbi Akiva, that whenever the Torah prohibits the marriage, and that's called Eva Bibi Israel, then automatically there's no Havaya, and the Vlad is a Mamzer. It's my Beinayu. So what's going to be the Nafkamina now? Between Reish Lakish, between Shimon Atimni and Rav Shimon ben Menasya, Ika Beinayu, on the top of Daf Lamed, Chayve Ese Mitzriv Hadomi. So Chayve Ese, according to Rav Meshevev, is less Bel Havaya, and therefore there won't be any Knas. However, according to, just 1 second, Chayve Ese. So again, it's certainly not Ruya L'Kaima, as far as Shimon Atimni is concerned. Sorry. As far as Rav Shimon Asi is concerned, it's not Ruya L'Kaima. So there would be no Knas. Would it be Knas according to Shimon Atimni, who says Yesh Ba'Havaya? And now what are we saying? Then in the case of Iser Ese, like Mitzri or Adomi, and what? Again, the Vlad is not a Mamzer. So then it's Yesh Ba'Havaya. If it's Yesh Ba'Havaya, which is the Shita of Shimon Atimni, correct? Yesh Ba'Havaya is then since there's no Mamzerus in the case of Mitri and Adomi Chayve Ese, therefore there is Havaya, there is Tfisas Kedushin, and there would be a Knas. But if we go with what? With the Shita of Ru'uya L'Kaima, she's certainly not, if we go with the Shita of Shimon Menasya, Ru'uya L'Kaima, so she's certainly not Ru'uya L'Kaima, there would be no Knas. Now, Rav Yeshevev said that Rabbi Akiva holds that whenever it's an Iser Bia, there is Mamzerus, there's no Tfisas Kedushin. So how can you say Yesh Ba'Havaya in the case of an Iser Ese of Yitzir Adomi? But the answer is that even Rav Yeshevev will be Modeh that there's no Mamzerus from the Chayve Ese of Mitzri Vadom. Okay, so this is where we'll stop for today, even though we're mamish in the middle of this whole sugya here between Shimon HaTimni and Rav Shimon ben Asi, but B'li Neder, we'll try to review it so that we'll be able to move on tomorrow. Okay, then. Okay, wishing you a great day. Thank you so much.